Well, Marty, we would like to officially welcome Penn State football to the 2025 college football season.
Yeah. I mean, after those first, we jokingly on the podcast weren't even calling it non-conference; we were calling it their preseason schedule. Those three teams, and I think obviously we'll get into it here tonight. There's definitely some pros and cons to that. I mean, but to have three games of that caliber, and I use that term lightly, followed by a bye week going into Oregon. I mean, again, you would like to see you having been a little bit more tested, I think, but there's definitely a lot of pros to where you're able to play a lot of young guys, cultivate some depth. Guys coming off-season injuries and surgeries, easing them back into it. So, you're about as healthy and ready to go as you can be from that standpoint going into a just absolute showdown of this magnitude.
Marty, let me hit you with a question, and good to talk to you again. I remember you being on our USC preview show last year. So, to me, looking at this game, I mentioned to Mark that both Oregon and Penn State, they're just playing nobodies and they go right to the top. Like there's no Minnesota or Nebraska mid-tier Big Ten game to kind of ease these teams in. They're just going right to the top of the food chain. So that's interesting. But anyway, my question is, Jim Knowles now at Penn State, but he shut down this Oregon offense in the Rose Bowl. Now, obviously it was Dylan Gabriel, not Dante Moore, but like Dylan Gabriel, proven winner, very experienced. Dante Moore at the other end of the spectrum in terms of experience. So what's the sense in terms of the Jim Knowles attack plan against Dante Moore and the Oregon offense? How much do you think he's going to take from the Rose Bowl into this game, or is this just a completely different animal? We'll unpack that for us.
Yeah, I'm very curious what that's going to look like because, like you said, you had a lot of success against them in the Rose Bowl. Obviously, just completely smothered that Oregon offense. At the same time, I'm sure Will Stein's going to come out looking with a completely different game plan than he had for the Rose Bowl going against the Jim Knowles defense. So that's a caveat here as well. But I think if you're Knowles, I think a big part of it too is you mentioned Dylan Gabriel. We're all agree Dante Moore has much more physical ability, a much higher ceiling than Dylan Gabriel. But Gabriel had, been there, done that, had proven it. And, for Dante Moore, yeah, there was that year at UCLA, but this is his first real kind of road test as a starter, and it couldn't be much more challenging than what it's going to be on Saturday night. So I think that's a factor for Knowles as well, right? You want to play fast in your pass rush. You want to try and make more uncomfortable early and often. I think one thing that's really going to get tested on Saturday for Jim Knowles, and I'll be curious to see how he does it. Penn State spent all offseason talking about this corner room. Right, they think they have a legitimate All-American first-round pick in A.J. Harris. They really like some of the guys behind him, Zion Tracy, Davian Collins, Elliott Washington. How much, and some of this could be, testing young Oregon receivers too, how much does he look to put those guys on an island early in the game and tell your pass rush, bring an Amari Campbell, a Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas, whoever it may be, as an extra blitzer. Hey, go get the quarterback, go make him uncomfortable, go make life tough on Dante Moore. Because I do think if you're Penn State, one of the paths to victory in this game is you make it uncomfortable for Moore early and you just never let him in the offense get comfortable. Because we've seen that in the whiteout before, right? Go back to I forget which year it was, one year when they blew the doors off Michigan, where Michigan's getting called for a delay of game on the first play of the game. And a few years ago against Minnesota, same thing. First play of the game, they had called for a false start and it just snowballs on them. So we've seen it happen before, and we've seen it happen with good teams where this crowd, the Ohio State game, everybody remembers the block 6 game where that was JT Barrett, right? One of the most accomplished quarterbacks of his era who just couldn't handle the atmosphere, couldn't handle the crowd. When the pass rush got going, Ohio State crumbled. So we've seen it happen in the whiteout before. So I'm going to be very curious to see if Knowles, this defensive back room that we heard so much about this offseason, how much trust does he put in them at least early in order to try and really get that pass rush in Dante Moore's face, make him uncomfortable, make life hard on him.
So we know, Marty, that this defense was elite last year. They lost some exceptional talent, but at the same time, they were bringing back a ton of guys that were expected to be, again, one of the top defenses in the country. Obviously, we had you on every few weeks to update us on where this defense stood. Now that you've seen them 3 times, again, you mentioned the caliber, in quotes, of opponents. Is there anybody standing out that wasn't necessarily expected to, or any concerns anything that's happened, because I got to tell you, aside from a halftime highlight of like one play here and one play there, I've seen nothing of this football team yet.
Yeah, I will say defensively, I mean, so far it's been a lot of what you'd expect. And I apologize, my dog just chased the cat.
They've got what, 2 shutouts?
Background news. One, Villanova scored on the last play.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
But I mean, Deni Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant have been unblockable, which you would hope against this opponent. I think if you have any concern, it's still the linebacker play to an extent. Tony Rojas has looked awesome. He was a guy last year who, I mean, played really well in the postseason. The pick 6 against SMU was tremendous. But it was battling a shoulder issue all year. And sometimes the tackling was questionable. He's been much better this year. He looks like a guy who had an offseason to let that shoulder rest and recover from surgery. But there's still some question there, right? I mean, Dom DeLuca is going to go down as a Penn State legend, especially for what he did against SMU in the playoff last year. But he was a former walk-on for a reason. There's some limitations there. Amari Campbell, the transfer from North Carolina, has played well, but at times has looked lost on the field. So you still have some concern at linebacker. As for a guy who, you know, has really burst onto the scene, it's true freshman Chaz Coleman. The staff hyped him all off season. There was some buzz in the Lash building that there's people in this program who think he's going to be a top 5 pick one day. And through 4 games, the stats don't do it justice. He has a sack, a blocked punt, and 3 tackles for a loss. But he, again, people can't block him. It has not mattered where he's lined up on the field. And again, like we've said, and we're going to continue to say, you take with the caveat of who they've played, but he's a true freshman who last year this time was playing quarterback in high school. And he has been an absolute terror at defensive end. If LeVar Arrington's son wasn't on the team, Chaz Coleman would have been the person who got 11 after Abdul Carter moved on. That's how highly they think of him. And he's looked that way so far. So I think that's been the biggest pleasant surprise on this defense has been Chaz Coleman. Really the defensive line as a whole, some of their young defensive tackles look ahead of where I think people thought they would be at this point, which is promising as well, because I mean, in football, obviously it's in the trenches. And if you can roll 5-6 deep at defensive tackle, which I think they can do this year in conference play, that goes a long way of keeping guys fresh. So in the fourth quarter, you know, you can have Zane Durant out there with maybe 10 less snaps on his legs than he would have otherwise and things of that nature. But yeah, I think the defense definitely, even with what they lost, does not look like it's taken a step back. And again, the guys you expect to dominate have, and the real big surprise has been Chaz Coleman, where there was so much buzz around him all offseason, but hey, until the true freshman gets here and you see it on the field, and boy, have we ever seen it on the field. So I think there's still a lot of reasons to expect this defense to be one of the best in the country again this year, but obviously Saturday is going to be a huge test for them.
I got a question on the other side of the ball. So Penn State preseason, I had very high expectations. My preseason pick to win the national championship. Obviously, the wide receiver position has been a little bit of an issue in the past, bringing the transfers. How are they working out? How's the pass game looking? Replacing Tyler Warren, how's that going? Because like Mark, I haven't really watched Penn State this year. We'll be watching them Saturday night, obviously. Yeah, tell me a little bit about how that's going.
Yeah, I mean, the transfer receivers have been really good. Trevor Pena has 13 catches for 166 in the score. Kyron Hudson has 14 for 156 in the score. Now, Devontae Ross only has 5 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown, but Ross was hurt most of fall camp, so he's one that they're kind of really were easing into things. But the biggest thing with the receivers, it hasn't even just been the production. There's catches being made that you're like, no receiver on this roster the last 2 years would have made those catches. And they're not necessarily, you know, these outstanding over-the-top receptions. I mean, again, I go back to the Orange Bowl last year. They did not have – no receivers caught a ball in the Orange Bowl. So I don't think it's a stretch to say if any one of these 3 guys were on the team last year, they would have played for the national championship. So the receivers definitely have taken a big step forward with those 3, and it's crisper. Guys are getting open. There's not the issues with separation that have been there the past couple of years. I think Kyron Hudson, you know, Matt, I know you and I had discussed him coming to Penn State in the past, where I think that Big Ten experience goes a long way, and he knows how to carry himself. I know he's a captain at USC. He's a captain here, kind of that leader of the room. I think has helped with the young guys a lot. And with replacing Tyler Warren, I mean, those 3 have helped. At tight end, the guy to watch, I mean, Khalil Dinkins is the quote-unquote starter, but the guy to watch is Luke Reynolds. He's averaging 11 yards a catch. Every time he catches the ball, you can see the explosiveness. You can see the playmaking ability. He reminds me a lot of Mike Gesicki. He's a slightly better blocker with the ball in his hands. Reminds me a lot of Gesicki. Luke Reynolds is the guy who last year against Minnesota, when they ran the fake punt to put the game away, he was the one who ran the play. So someone who, from the time he was a true freshman last year, they had a lot of faith in, and you've seen his role just slowly grow in the offense each week. So that's another guy to watch. But I mean, the passing game, it's kind of wild because the past 2 years, the passing game, the problem wasn't necessarily Drew Aller, it was who he was throwing to. But through 3 games, Drew Aller has been he's left a lot to be desired. His mechanics have been bad at times. The footwork hasn't been there. I thought against Nevada he played pretty well, and the pre-snap reads, the decision making, that sort of thing was tremendous. And in the last 2 weeks, it just has not been. Now, I'm sure no one would ever say this, but when you're playing Villanova, you're playing FIU, and that FIU game was in a monsoon for the first half, it's hard to get up for it. It is. They also aren't running him at all. So some of the RPOs and things of that nature, the defenses are selling out on the running backs. And James Franklin came out and said, like, after the Nevada game, Drew ran the ball like 6 times. He was ticked. Like, he doesn't want him running the ball that much in those games, right? Save those hits for Oregon for conference play. So I think you're going to see him run a lot more on Saturday, which will throw a wrinkle in there with the offense. But yeah, if you can get Drew into a rhythm, I think this passing game can really click because the transfer receivers, all 3 of them look like they're going to be big hits. And again, Luke Reynolds is a young guy who's really starting to emerge at tight end. Andrew Rappleyea is another young tight end who would have played a big role last year, but tore his ACL against West Virginia in the first game of the year. He's averaging 11 yards a catch this year. So the playmakers are there. It's just a matter you need Drew Aller to settle in and get into a rhythm, which is something he really hasn't done yet this year.
Marty, let me talk about Penn State's offensive coordinator. Talked about the defensive coordinator. Now let's talk about the offensive coordinator. So Andy Kotelnicki, he did a lot of elaborate things with Tyler Warren, whom Chris mentioned in his question. But that dynamic I mentioned earlier, playing nobody and then now going all the way to the top of the food chain with Oregon, with nothing in between. And this game being in late September, the history of college football has often tilted based on the timing of matchups. Like if Bobby Bowden and Florida State had played Miami in November instead of early in the season, maybe the story of this sport in the 1980s and 1990s is dramatically different. So with this game being earlier in the season and Penn State having these new pieces, a new configuration on offense, does that point to a simpler plan for Kotelnicki, or is this just a game that's too big to try and be simple and just, kind of ease Drew Aller in? No, you need to throw the kitchen sink at Oregon. Which way do you think the pendulum swings along those lines?
I definitely think it swings towards throw the kitchen sink. I mean, they have been frustratingly boring and vanilla these first 3 games, which again, you expect, right? They could line their D squad up and they'd be 3-0 right now. So, but I think, again, you're going to see Drew run more, which he hasn't done much this year. One thing Andy Kotelnicki offense is known for is the pre-snap motions and that sort of stuff. We haven't seen a lot of it. I think you're going to see a lot more of that on Saturday. I think a lot of times that can be very underrated on how much that can make things difficult for a defense. We haven't seen a whole lot yet in the way of trick plays or, last year it was Tyler Warren. I don't know who it's going to be this year, but they're going to have somebody. There's going to be something we haven't seen yet. There's going to be multiple somethings we haven't seen yet. I'm confident of that you're going to see on Saturday. And, in the 12-team era, obviously this game is not nearly as important as it would have been 2 years ago. But at the same time, make no ifs, ands, or buts about it. James Franklin knows what his reputation is in these kinds of games, and he knows this is a great opportunity to get that monkey off his back because, I think if you're Penn State, this is one that you really got to find a way to win it because everything's in your favor, right? Oregon's got to come the whole way across the country to play in maybe the most hostile environment in college football. It's a young quarterback in his real first true road test. You are the Ohio State of last year, the Michigan of 2 years ago, where you brought everybody back to make one last run at this. This is one you got to get. And I think that Kotelnicki's going to leave no stone unturned. I also think part of that with hey, we really want this one. This is shaping up to be maybe the biggest recruiting weekend in the history of Penn State football with what their visitor list is. You want to put on a show for those guys that are going to be there. So yeah, I think Kotelnicki's going to completely empty the bag this weekend. And part of it also is if you look at their schedule, after this, you have UCLA, you have Northwestern, you've got a bye week. You got some time to play another team that you really, view as a threat to you. So you've got some time, if you empty the bag this weekend, to come up with something new for when you go to Ohio State in November that the Buckeyes haven't seen on film. So I think that's a factor also where, you've got a whole month till you go to Columbus after this, where if you completely empty the tool bag this weekend and get that victory, you've got time to come up with something new that the Buckeyes haven't seen that you don't want to have on film.